Good afternoon. This week is a double Parsha, which I myself had forgotten. Thank you, Lauren, for reminding me. The reason is because this is catch-up Shabbat. I don't mean as in the condiment. I mean as in catching up. Because Pesach ended on a Shabbat for us, in Israel, it ended on a Friday. And since then, we have been one Parsha off of our Israeli brothers and sisters. So this week, we are catching up with them as we end the book of Bamidbar with this double Parsha of Matot-Masai. So this particular Parsha also comes to us in the midst of the 3 weeks, commemorating so much that was wrong in our history and how we fell into total discord with each other, with God, and with our land. It's interesting that I find a kind of bipolar dynamic these weeks in terms of these parshiot, which indicate order, guidelines for success, and the 3 weeks during which we mourn the loss of so much of this. It is summer. So many of our friends post their travels and the places they go and the sights they see, the journeys we will take. Numerous colleagues and friends are in Israel after not being there for 2.5 years due to COVID. We will be there, God willing, in August. Everything is meaningful. So much of what we've taken for granted, we now post on Facebook for all to witness. We do this to hold on to the meaningful experiences, the places, and the sights of our lives. It is natural, and its meaning is heightened when it is a special set of circumstances, such as those that we confront in our lives today. I'm going to begin with Parshat Matot, and in this particular Parsha, we begin with instructions about vows, about the things that we say, the things that we promise to do. And we read in the very beginning of this particular parsha, Vaydaber Moshe al Roshei Matot lifnei Yisrael lemor zeh hadavar asher tzivah Hashem. So note the order here. God speaks to Moshe, Moshe speaks to the head of the tribes, and they then convey the message of God to the Bnei Yisrael. We have organization, we have calm, we have structure. We then have instructions about vows, and that if someone makes a neder, makes a vow, that they are obligated to complete it. They are obligated to do what they said. If a woman makes a vow, her husband or her father can absolve her of the vow under specific circumstances. We then have various combinations of the responsibilities of people to actually do what they say they're going to do. The responsibility of nullifying vows, hefer nidarim, to nullify a vow or to forgive a vow. These verses are amplified significantly in the Mishnah, in the Gemara, and in Rambam's Mishnah Torah. The use of words and promises made are very seriously addressed here, and indicating that we must be carefully attuned to and attentive to what we say and what we promise to do. Why is this here? So first of all, we understand that God creates the world through utterances, going all the way back to Parshat Bereshit. We understand the power of words, but we may not see or perceive the essence of all that the words we speak represent. Perhaps we learn from this that words are more powerful than we can even imagine, and therefore we must take great care to not use or misuse them, but rather use them sparingly and intentionally. After this introductory piece about vows, Nidarim, we then read about an intense attack against Midian, which is very difficult and takes up a good portion of this particular parsha. God speaks to Moshe, saying, again, this drum roll of the order of how words are conveyed, Take revenge for the children of Israel against the Midianites for how they treated you, and then you will be gathered to your people. You will die. Moshe speaks to the people and says, you must fight this war. You must go and destroy all. And the words that are used here are very interesting in that it says, and Moshe speaks to the nation saying, you shall go and you shall be against Midian. It specifically uses the word anashim, the same word that we used in Shalach Lecha, that you will send people of repute. In other words, leaders. This is not a rank and file army of no-gooders, but rather these are people that know what's going on, know what the limits are, know what the ramifications of what they're being told is. At the end of this parsha, after we read about this war against Midian, Moshe then says to the people, if you will do this thing, if you will arm yourselves for the battle before God, and your armed forces cross the Jordan, and the land will be conquered, then all will be set in terms of land, God, and you in your relationship. But if you do not do what you have said that you will do, because you will follow these directions, you will have sinned against God. You must be aware of your sin. And then it says in the last pasuk, Dibru lachem arim letabchem, ugderot letzonechem, vayotzei mipichem ta'asu. You will then go, again, organization, build cities for your children, enclosures for your sheep, and you will do everything that you have said you will do. We begin and we end this parsha with words, with the power they convey. But what's the connection? We go from extensive warning about the words we speak to the battle we must fight. How do we understand this progression? One possible suggestion is that extreme discipline and restraint must be used in both cases, both when we are fighting, in this case, a milchemet mitzvah, a commanded war, and also when we speak and when we promise whatever it is we promise. It is much too easy to be carefree and even thoughtless with our words and go too far. In the case of battle, it is tempting to go too far as well, in destruction or in making one's decisions on the way, which is what kind of happens here. That is why in war, every soldier must do exactly what they are told to do and not make determinations amongst themselves as they go along. For such decisions may seem right at the moment, but may not serve the actions that must be taken, such as when God instructs the Bnei Israel here. Moshe becomes angry with the officers of the army, the commanders of thousands and the commanders of hundreds who had returned from the war. Moshe says to them, Achayitem kol nekeva, you allowed all the women to live? They were the same ones who were involved with the children of Israel on Balaam's advice to betray our Lord over the incident of Peor, resulting in the plague amongst the congregation of the Lord. So now, kill every male child and every woman who can lie with any man. And all the young girls you may keep for yourselves. Clearly, war is difficult, and we have a natural aversion to it if we truly value human life, as we are taught in one of the most fundamental teachings of halacha and Jewish text. Why does Moshe become angry here? Because the initial instructions to destroy all were not followed. While we understand this all too well and certainly have different standards for behavior for those who threaten and wage war as opposed to innocent civilians, here is what is being reflected is counterintuitive for us. A treasured colleague of mine from long ago and a wonderful teacher, Rabbi Ephraim Buchwald, tries to help us make sense of this quandary by sharing as follows. Moshe expresses his anger at the officers, demanding to know why they allowed the female Midianites to live. After all, it was the Midianite women, remember the incident we talked about with Parshat Pinchas, who had been so instrumental in Israel's sinfulness. Moses then instructs the army to kill all the male children and any woman who is laying with a man. After a brief aside, where the Torah deals with koshering looted utensils and a full account is taken of the booty that they acquire from this battle, God instructs the people how to properly divide the spoils, giving the greatest share to the soldiers who fought in the battle and put their lives on the line. We as students of Torah often encounter difficult parshiot and complex concepts. And even within them, this particular parsha is especially challenging. After all, how can the Bnei Yisrael, who are known as rabbinic literature as Rachamim Bnei Rachamanim, compassionate ones who are the children of compassionate ones, as we read in Beitzah 32b and other places, how can they kill women and children? Our Chazal, our rabbis, were troubled by this as well. They provided insight by insisting that the Jewish army is a compassionate army. Rambam elucidates his contention in his Mishnah Torah, the laws of the kings, Hilchot Melachim, chapter 6, and he says, Karim lo shalom. The Jewish army must always call out to its enemies in peace and offer that peace before any attack is instigated. Even the 7 native Canaanite nations whom God commanded to annihilate man, woman, and child and cattle must first be given the opportunity to surrender and accept Jewish rule. Only if they refuse, or only if they give pushback, may they be attacked. So this still offends us. This is not exactly an answer for us. One answer is that in war, there are never no victims. Clearly, there's always these problems of abuse and of losers and of people who die and of people who just lose so much. We know that. But the notion that is filled in, and we read this in Rambam from time to time, that if something is simply stated in the Torah, we must lefaresh oto, we must explain it further. So Rambam takes it upon himself to do so. And he says, if people abide by the Noahide principles, you must offer peace. And even when you attack people, we read in Rambam's Mishnah Torah, you cannot surround them in battle, but you must leave an opening for them to escape. So in other words, what we're doing here is interfacing what the Jewish people are commanded to do for reasons they may or may not understand, and then this principle of Rachmanim, of being compassionate people and caring about life. How do we do both at the same time? So let's review for just a moment. 1, the Bnei Yisrael are preparing to enter their land. 2, Moshe Rabbeinu is about to die. 3, order and discipline must be maintained, both in action and in words. 4, enemies are dealt with practically, and we find information is filled in the Mishnah Gemara and Mishnah Torah in terms of offering peace first. You do not just go and destroy, but there is a seder, there is a discipline that one follows. And finally, while accommodations are made to remove the threatening enemy, one must also maintain discipline and order, as we are reminded in the beginning of the Parsha. Consider this scenario. When people are confronting danger, do they not invoke their faith by saying something along these lines? God, get me through this, and I vow I will do X. And once we understand that, perhaps we can see that connection between the scripted paucity of our words, the carefulness that we take, not being too verbose, not promising too much, and also not acting too much as well, but using discipline in both of these difficult situations. Rabbi Michael Hatton suggests as follows: a vow to God must be fulfilled, even if it's onerous. Thus, at the end of the Parsha, it says, you must do what God tells you to, as scripted by Moshe. You may not understand, but you must do it. And as you say, you will do. But a vow is not undertaken in a cavalier manner and without good cause, especially when one feels overwhelmed by life's trials, especially when a difficult mission appears on the horizon. It is a vow to God that can provide the person with the confidence to go forward. So in that respect, a vow can be properly articulated, but must be carefully watched. Technically, of course, not every vow need be precipitated by a moment of abject danger or else triggered by a life-threatening event. Certainly, the opening legislation of the Parshat deals with less grave moments, with more routine vows that may be undertaken by a man or by a woman in the service of God or for self-growth. But the very fact that Moshe communicates the legislation to the tribal elders first is significant, for it is they who will later be charged with encouraging the people in their overwhelming task of conquering and settling land. It is they who will also be charged with overseeing the vows. When a vow must be mitigated or must be nullified or must somehow be overturned, then often the recourse is that you go to the Chachmei Ha'ir, you go to the wise leaders in the community for such absolution. Therefore, these leaders understand the nature of vows and the critical formula that equates success with self-confidence, with steadfast trust and the courage to go on, even in the face of insurmountable odds. The topic of vows, then, with which our Parsha begins and ends, the first Parsha, Matot, is the glue that binds these elements together and provides Israel with perhaps the most critical lesson of all. Though God had promised the land to them and to their descendants in perpetuity, though God has pledged God's ongoing assistance and constant concern and care through the wilderness experience that will shape and mature the people and prepare them for the task ahead, conquering and settling the land would still be an overwhelming task. It will be lengthy, it will be drawn out. There will be no shortage of setbacks or obstructions on this journey they will take. We then go on to Parshat Masai, and we begin this particular parsha once we have read about this very difficult battle of Midian and the notion of the seriousness of vows, with the following statement: Ela mis'ai b'nei Yisrael asher yatzu me'eretz Mitzrayim mitzvotam b'yad Moshe v'Aharon. These are the journeys, not journey, but journeys, Masai, not Masa, who left the land of Egypt in their legions under the charge of Moshe and Aharon. Sephorno teaches God wanted all of the journeys to be recorded here in order to complement the Jewish people who had followed God blindly through the desert where nothing grew, so that as a reward for their faith, they would deserve to enter and inherit Eretz Yisrael. Vayichtov Moshe, and Moshe wrote down the names of the places toward which they were setting out, as well as the names of the places from where they had started a particular journey. Sephorno points out that this is an unusual sequence. Usually we say we're starting out from X and we're going to Y. But Sephorno's point is we talk about Y first. We talk about when we were in Israel, or when my husband and I were just in Atlantic City. We don't begin with where we left from. We talk about the experiences of those journeys. What I would like to suggest is this makes perfect sense, because when we journey, we're focused on the goal, the destination of our travels. That is the way we think. And so it is here. It is through understanding what was going to happen in Eretz Yisrael and what their task was and the organizational structure that they were going to use that the travels through the Midbar make sense. Why are these recorded, asked Rashi? To inform us of the kind deeds of God. For although God had issued a decree to move the Bnei Yisrael around from place to place and make them wander, you should not say that they were moving about aimlessly, but rather each destination had a purpose. So in this parsha, we see they travel to such and such a place and something happens. These are the starting points. These are the places they will go. These are the places where certain pivotal events occur. They journeyed from Ramses, for example, in verse 3. In the first month, on the 15th day of the first month, on the day following the Pesach sacrifice, the children of Israel left before the eyes of all the Egyptians. So that's an example of how the place and the experience become linked. Going back to those Facebook posts that everybody's putting up, people will post, I was in such and such a place, and this was the experience. The place is not a neutral statement, but it is rather a trigger for what happened there. The Bnei Israel at this point see the Egyptians that are busy burying their loved ones who had died, and they were occupied with their mourning. So as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, it's really important that we are in certain places at certain times. It's like planning your trip so that you are in the right place at the right time for a concert or a special event or a simcha. You will be in whatever places you will be so that you can attend those events. So let's think about the timing here. What was it exactly that God wanted the Bnei Israel to see? What was the purpose of all their journeys? They then go to Sukkot, the place. And so it continues. All places are necessary for the purposes of what was seen, so that they could arrive at precisely the right moment for designated events, and so on. All planned by God. These are not aimless wanderings. They may be wanderings in the sense of a personal understanding of mission, but clearly within the executed planning of Ribono Shel Olam. So let's look at the further progression of their journeys in this second parasha and the experiences that they had and lessons to be learned. They go from Alush and they go to Refidim. There's no water for people to drink. They go from Refidim and they go to the Sinai Desert. From the Sinai Desert to Rot Tatava'ah. From there, Chatzerot, and v'chulei, v'chulei, v'chulei. So Rashi claims that the names of places are given in reference to things that actually happened there. For example, Ritma, we're told, is named such because of the slander of the spies, Lashon hara shel meraglim, because it says in Tehillim 120 verse 3, Ma yitain lacha or ma yosif lacha lashon rimiyah. What can God give you? What can God add to your experience? Ramat, your deceitful tongue, sharpened arrows of a gibor, of a hero. So the name of the place now becomes associated with what happened. The 40 years are not a matter of being lost, with a nod to all the jokes we tell, like where was AAA at the time? This happened because the leaders were all men and they never stopped to ask for directions and so on. But rather, it's not about the places. It's about the experiences that happen to test the people and increase their faith in God. The bitter waters. So a place is called Moriah, the bitter waters. What we just said about Ritma. Places are called as such to remind us of what happened there. They will be imprinted on our minds. They then go on. Aharon ascends Mount Hor when they are at Edom on the first day of the 5th month, and Aaron was 123 years old, and he dies there. Much is happening. Generally, this is exhausting to read, whether we focus on the names of places or the fact of these experiences that happened in these places. This is about being present, sometimes painfully so. So often we are focused on what was or what will be, but we're missing what is happening at this moment. To this point, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono L'Shalom, teaches as follows. Etre ailleurs, to be elsewhere. This is the great vice of people. It's great and secret virtue, the great vocation of this people. So wrote the French poet and essayist Charles Pigio. A philosopher in the age of anti-Semitism. He continues, any crossing for them means the crossing of a desert. The most comfortable houses, the best built from stones as big as the temple pillars, the most real of the real estate, the most overwhelming of apartment houses will never mean more to them than a tent in the desert. What he meant was that history and destiny had combined to make the Jews aware of the temporariness of any dwelling outside of Eretz Yisrael. To be a Jew is to be on a journey, ivri, we pass through. This is how the Jewish story began when Abraham first heard the words Lech Lecha, with their call to leave and to travel to the land that God would show him. That is how it began again in the days of Moshe, when the family had become a people. And that is the point almost endlessly repeated in this last parsha of Sefer Bamidbar. They set out from X and they camped at Y. They set out from Y and they camped at Z. 42 times, 42 stages of the journey in 40 years. We are the people who travel. We are the people, says Rabbi Sachs, who do not stand still. We are the people for whom time itself is a journey through the wilderness in search of the promised land. Our text continues. The Lord spoke to Moshe in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Yericho, saying, Daber b'nei Yisrael mata alehem ki atem avrim et hayardena aretz Canaan. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, you will cross the Jordan, you will go to the land of Canaan. You will drive out the inhabitants of the land before you and nod back to the war with Midian. You will destroy their temples, their molten idols, and demolish their high places. You will clear out the land and settle in it, for I have given you this land to occupy. At this point in the parasha, parameters are established for the borders, for land assignments, inheritors, position of the Levium, the Area Miklat, cities of refuge, and specifically who they are for and who they are not for, and other important details that will structure the settlement of the land of Eretz Yisrael in an organized and proper fashion, as dictated by God. Again, we note that we have a hard time with parts of these instructions, namely the driving out of previous inhabitants. But, and here is the point, this is not by our initiative. This is strictly following the instructions of God for purposes that God alone understands. Remember Rashi's point about why Bereshit bara Elokim begins with the creation of all that is? It was precisely for this. So that when someone says, why are you taking this land? We can say, because God, the Creator God, ordained that this land is for the Jews. And other people have their lands as well. Consider that in our contemporary world, we as Jews are often worried about Palestinians who are harmed in various conflicts, who are ousted from certain areas in Israel. It is understood that in terms of our foundational beliefs as Rahmanaim, as compassionate people, we are concerned about all innocent lives. There are many Israelis, Jews, and yes, folks, in the Orthodox observant world as well, who share this concern and who are working to ensure the safety, viability, integrity of all people. And simultaneously, we must ask ourselves, who worries about all the Jews who were thrown out of too many countries of origin? Many of us listening to this shiur right now have in our past been thrown out of homes in Russia or Germany or Arabic lands and so many other places. This is not to say that we should participate in some warped notion of monkey see, monkey do, chas v'chalila. Quite the opposite. Now we go back to the fundamental plan here. The Bnei Yisrael have a land, and that land is Eretz Yisrael as we know it today, Medinat Yisrael. This has to be part of a worldwide equation of all the land and all the peoples and everybody who's out there whom the Creator God brought into being. Parameters and boundaries are set regarding land, behaviors, and all elements that are related. This is not merely a matter of privilege or promise, but precisely about the responsibilities and limits that are inherent in that promise. This is related to the problem of how do we reconcile a law given with practicality encountered. I often teach about the intersection of halakha and fill in the blank. This often happens in our life. It is interesting to note at this point, and I'm not going to say too much about it because I'm going to say more about it next week in comparing the very, very end of Bamidbar with the very first experience that is recounted in Devarim. But it is at this point, and in this spirit, that we move on to Benot Zelavchad, circling back to how we respond to conflicting claims and recalibrate our reality, or in this case, the law, to accommodate both claims in a reasonable manner. We just read this, and yet it is repeated here about the accommodation that is made for the Benot Zelavchad. As we look at this next week, I want us to consider the very different tone of this last narrative of Bamidbar, in which we are given these instructions of how to be, of what journeys to take, of what to learn from our journeys, of boundaries, of when the law has to be adjudicated or accommodative of different issues. And in Devarim, the first instance that is recounted is that of the Meraglim. There are very different instances and very different reasons why this is the last narrative of Bamidbar and why, after recounting the numbers again in the beginning of Devarim, that is the first story, the first narrative that is told. There are different reasons for the stories we tell about the journeys we take. We have learned that names are recounted for good, and names are recounted to remind us of mistakes and missteps that people have made. We are taught that we remember certain places by various instances that happened there. We are a people of memory. We are a people that hold on to those memories. That is what the 3 weeks are about. As we wrap up Sefer Bamidbar and the narrative before the very end, where Moshe gives his final speeches, if you will, before he dies, it is important for us to remember not just the journeys that we take, but the reason for those journeys. Not just the words we speak, but the reason for those words. Not just the conflicts that we confront, but A, the reason for those conflicts, B, how we're supposed to act in them, and C, somehow in all of this not lose the foundational principles on which our lives are based. Our solutions may not be perfect. They will not be without cost. There will always be compromises. The Benot Zelavchad will get their land, but they will have to marry within their tribe. People will be driven out. Peace is offered first. Escape routes are always there. Not perfect, but we're doing the best we can. And maybe in all of this is an understanding that God realizes the limits of the individuals that God created, and that these guidelines are to help us to navigate the conflicts the best we can. That, I think, is the lesson of the journeys we take with their setbacks and as we move towards their destination. Shabbat Shalom.